Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Dr. Cuellar. Thank you, distinguished guests and also students for taking the time out to engage with us this afternoon. Thank you all. So I have assembled a few notes around the fact of the new curricular framework, actually, and the question about whether and how it might assist us to, quote, break our children free from old ways of thinking, end quote. As to the premise, have we broken free from colonial thought at present? The answer is a boring no. But this is not meant as a lament. The question is somewhat naive. You don't go through 300 years of plunder and poverty, of squalor and neglect, and then simply and righteously declare yourself free of all consequence and culpability. Further, and this is hard for me, and a challenge to those who throw about the word decolonization too facilely, our own cultural identities are so bound up with colonial history that I wonder if absolute decolonization isn't a form of autoimmune disorder. Our modern nation is born out of colonialism. To excise it must be painful. In his book, How Britain Underdeveloped the Caribbean, Sir Hilary Beckles reveals how the UK skillfully weaseled out of its responsibilities after it systematically exploited the region. It set up Caribbean leaders for failure at independence. I cite this work to make the broad claim that some of the social misery and poverty we have today is the result of intentional colonial underdevelopment. I just want to recognize that. So no, just as those thinkers of post-colonialism and decolonization insist, these legacies of colonization persist to the present day. Structures that enable exploitation remain. They must be dismantled. So the question is, how does our education system provide learners with the tools to perform this dismantling? And how do we then rebuild and support attempts to reimagine more life-affirming futures? I take this to be a challenge for myself and my colleagues. To what extent in our respective spheres of influence are we achieving these goals? My specific prompt asks how the new curriculum might break learners free from old ways of thinking. And I don't take this to suggest an uncritical embrace of newness or a fetishization of youth culture. Instead, I think it points to the need for continuous critical reflection. In the book, Something Torn and New, the great Kenyan writer Ngugi wa Thiong'o describes colonialism as cultural dismemberment. He gives a gruesome literal example in the beheading of King Hintsa in that book to reveal the real cruelty and utter loss wrought by imperialism and its handmaiden colonialism. You can't simply ignore what has happened. That loss is irrevocable. Professor of rhetoric Peng Chia builds on Ngugi's work to offer a metaphor for understanding how we cope in the aftermath of colonial brutality and cultural dismemberment. Peng Chia argues that for such nations, the post-colonial state functions as a kind of prosthesis. This is the metaphor. When the state responds to the people's needs, then it is an enabling and appropriate prosthesis. If it works in service of outside entities, then it is an oppressive and alienating one. The danger of neocolonialism, or the continuation of colonial logic after independence, is that a foreign prosthesis is attached onto the nation, one that is inappropriate and fails to respond to the people's needs. In Chia's words, the prosthesis then, quote, harnesses and bends the state towards multinational capitals' inhuman interests, end quote. When we look at such proposed projects in the country today as massive cruise ports, extractive mining, logging operations, dams, we ought to ask, do these projects have the development and well-being of communities, people, and environment at their core? Or are these projects primarily designed to efficiently extract the greatest possible wealth from the region and move it outside? There are forces out there not designed to alleviate social miseries or improve our human lives, but to firstly, maximally, extract financial profit for the few. And in my mind, the connection is clear. Such was the model in colonial times, extractivism. Get the wealth and get it out. Antonio Benitez Rojo writes in his book, The Repeating Island, about the medieval vacuum cleaner imperialists installed in the Caribbean, the tubes sucking wealth that birthed modern-day exploitative capitalism from a Caribbean womb, with the painful clamps of plantation slavery and the encomienda system. What a legacy. But if there is something that our education system can inculcate, it would be to employ emancipatory and liberatory methods that empower and enable learners of all ages to develop discernment, resilience, 21st century skills, uncommon discipline, and the ability to maintain extended, skillful focus in an age of shrinking attention spans. A tall order. My humble contribution here is simple and a twofold claim. First, that decolonization is a perpetual process and not an arrived-at destination. And two, that the arts and humanities are essential for the project of decolonization. In fact, it's really on that latter conviction I agreed to speak here today. There is a damaging attitude to education currently ranging the world that tries to convince us that education is nothing more than a product, that universities are factories competing in the global education market, that students are customers, that the managerial language is already here when professors are reduced to mere content creators, placeholders without attending to their essential role in creating a community of inquiry within the local context from which we emerge. This view sees education instrumentally, that you just go to school to get a job to work for the man. Nothing more. And certainly not for any fluffy or romantic notion of cultivating qualities that might distinguish yourself as a person. This idea is memorably reflected in this meme I saw where a young person is asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they answer, an honest, brave, compassionate human being. That's the wrong answer, right? The questioner, obviously irritated by his idealistic response, interjects, no. I mean, how do you want to sell your labor? Is that the end-all, be-all of your education? So my first prescriptive observation is that while we must be practical in charting our future, we ought still to discard the attitude that views education only in instrumental terms. If we are not being taught and encouraged how to question, how to research, if we do not provide learners with opportunities to craft, create, articulate, and explore in a safe environment of open inquiry, then we impoverish our learners. So to answer the question, insofar as the new curriculum promotes the development of research skills, of knowledge discernment, of building competencies instead of rote learning alone, as the framework sets out to do, does it aid in our decolonization? The other prescription is to focus on building 21st century skills. It is one thing to teach children to read the labels of some product, corned beef tins, for example, to determine which one is cheaper. It is yet another to teach materials awareness so that they ask, look at this packaging. Is this wasteful? How complex is the production system here? How are fossil fuels being used to get it to me? Which of these products is using local ingredients? Or advertising awareness. How does this product target me? What messaging does it exploit? Deeper grounded economic awareness. This seems cheap here, but will I get a massive hospital bill 10 years from now? All sorts of skills are needed. And in an age of looming ecological catastrophe, our education must be able to provide psychical survival gear for the 21st century. The Handbook of Sustainability Literacy identifies needed skills: futures thinking, emotional well-being, optimization, finding meaning without consuming, social conscience, appropriate technology, appropriate design. We need ecological intelligence, new media literacy, transition skills, cultural literacy, citizen engagement, commons thinking, a whole learning society. So the lesson is that curricular review, like decolonization, is a continual work in progress. It must be ongoing. I'm glad to see that the curriculum framework employs the STEAM acronym, that the arts are recognized as a crucial component, because the arts and humanities provide lifelong transferable skills and are inherently critical of instrumentalism. As an adjunct lecturer at UB, when Dr. Palacio, I think, was chair in management faculty in Belize City, I once attended a conference on photovoltaics, where a literal rocket scientist was sharing his CV. The complexity of his work was fascinating. You might argue that there's beauty and elegance inherent in the equation for projectile trajectory over the surface of the Earth. How so many variables are involved in targeting a point a few meters in diameter 1,000 miles away. But he was eventually disillusioned. In the end, he realized he was creating bombs that would destroy black and brown bodies in struggling nations under false pretenses. The arts and humanities are essential here. Just as we seek material uplift and technological advancement, this needs to run lockstep with the cultivation of empathy, cultural literacy, identity, and soul. There is no mere technological escape from the mental slavery Marcus Garvey challenged us to free our minds from. I'm inspired by the work of Belizeans who model research ethics that practice decolonization at the academic and pedagogical level. I'm inspired by the work of my colleagues here on the stage and those abroad who critique extractivist models of research where knowledge is harvested in regions like ours to further the careers of outsiders without attendant capacity building or results sharing or national depositing, as I understand the journal that UB is creating would help to address. I'll conclude with this thought. So much of colonial history is based on misapprehensions, misnaming, and intellectual arrogance. Belize's own history is no exception. The other day, in one of my classes, we were considering Matthew Restall's evaluation of competing theories on the origins of the name Belize. His paper presents this remarkable speculative scene where he imagines colonial explorers encountering indigenous Maya, the Tipu River, and asking them, ¿Qué es el nombre de este río? And the imagined response of these colonial era Mayas, they answered Bel Itza, meaning this is the way to Itza. The ignorant colonial explorers thought the Maya were sharing the name of the river, which became the name of the place and eventually the country. On one level, this scene is so quintessentially colonial, like Columbus's West Indies, yet another geographical malapropism. A whole territory misnamed. Our whole nation named after some colonial mistake. How embarrassing. Like so many other colonial legacies. But on another view, there is something salvageable about that legacy. Belize is not a place name. It's a way, a journey. And that is the lesson. We are not there. We must always be going. Thank you.